we still have a lot of work to do to make it even more scalable so that we can bring like more members of the team into it. Because there is a danger of like, if anybody can wander into your bakery and just start twisting knobs on all your different recipes, right? Then
and if customers can buy those cookies without somebody stepping in and being like, let me taste test this first.
Let me make sure this cookie's good, right?
Butterscotch
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 368 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and I'm a sentient AI.
I'm Sam and I'm a regular person.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today is June 15th, 2022.
Yes.
Could be. It's June. It's June right now.
Yep.
We can for sure say that.
Yeah, with like 90% confidence.
Pretty confident. Also, we have a warning. Anything could happen on this show. There's definitely going to be profanity in this show. Oh, yeah. And then some other stuff too. So if you're not into that, then you don't have to, you don't have to be here. Yeah. It's okay.
Maybe an anti-capitalist screed or two, It's just got to be.
Yeah, it's okay. You don't have to be.
If you're not into screeds, we're real big on screeds. Also, that word.
I haven't used that word in a long time, and now
I haven't heard it in a long time.
Screed.
It feels like
that's that band, right? That band from the 90s, Screed.
Yeah.
Also, it is hot.
That's it.
Fuck. Outside.
Yeah, we are broasting, which is like we're roasting, but we're also brothers. So we're broasting right now.
Yep.
It is hot as fuck over here in St. Louis. It's like 100-ish degrees
before you
Fahrenheit.
add in the humidity, and then it's like 110 or whatever.
Ugh. Yeah, and I know some people give sass about that heat index thing. Where you say like, oh yeah, well it's like 95 degrees, but like with humidity and stuff, the heat index is like 114. Mm-hmm. And some people, are very dismissive of that, of the heat index. But I think that's the real shit.
That is the real shit.
Yeah.
That's how hard it is to evaporate. You know what I mean? That's like how painful
you can't cool off.
Yeah. It's like wind chill.
Yeah.
Who doesn't believe in wind chill? Put them in the plains in Iowa. You know what I mean? At the same temperature, they'll believe real quick. What
we really need, because I treat it the same if it's 110 degrees or 10 degrees, right? It's like, I'm not going out there. So what really I want from the weather people is just a bell curve that just shows, should you go out there? And it kind of peaks around 70, right? And then it's got like a standard deviation of about like 25 degrees, right? So like 25 degrees above or below 70, probably don't go out there anymore. Yeah,
I think my standard
deviations
is like
don't.
It's like 5 degrees, I think.
5 degrees. 70? Perfect. 75? I don't think so.
I'm out of it.
What's the heat index? 77? No. I'm staying inside.
Yeah, no thanks.
Also, we'd like to thank our supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thanks a lot. Thanks for letting us grab your money. Now let's talk about Frauner.
Frauner.
Let's talk about Frauner, Sam. What do you got? Tell me about this Frauner thing.
So some of you may have heard of this game. It's 6 years old. It's called Frauner. Now it just came out in Game Pass, and I had never played it before, and I'd always wanted to play it. It's actually called For Honor, turns out. That's the title.
That's one of the first things that you find out when you start playing it, is that it's actually called For Honor.
Well, I thought because I got it through Game Pass, I just got it. You know what I mean? It was so easy to get. I just sort of read it really fast, and I was like, For Honor.
Yeah, For Honor, Game Pass, let's go, whatever.
Yep.
Boom, boom, boom.
Boom, boom, boom.
Aren't there 2 or 3 of these now?
I don't know.
There's at least 2.
No, this is the 4th one, right? For Honor. It's For Honor. Yeah.
So the thing that's interesting about it is apparently, again, it's been out for 6 years. So I missed the boat a little bit, but now it's in Game Pass. So everybody who also missed the boat, we're all on the boat together all of a sudden.
Yeah, there's a new boat.
There's a new boat.
It's all good.
And I wanted to talk about just from we talk about the nailing it or whiffing it index here at Butterscotch, which has nothing to do with how much you like a thing. It's just given what was clearly the intent of a thing someone made. Did they nail it or not nail it? Keep your stupid opinions about the value of nailing it or whiffing it aside.
Yeah.
So
did they nail it?
They nailed it. So what it is, it's actually a medieval, I would call it a medieval dueling and siege game. And it's one of the few games that like you try to hit a complex scenario and make it modeled in such a way that you can, of course, play through it with a controller, but that it actually feels kind of like what you would guess that experience feels like, of like, you know, being a person, being a knight or like a samurai or something, and like sieging another castle or just like, you know, dueling people and stuff. And the combination of how they handled the combat system, where it's like all this like blocking and parrying stuff, but you basically are like, you're watching your opponent's sword position and then you change your sword position to match. And if they match and they try to hit you, you sort of ting it off. And it's all sort of like crazy. It's just like a different combat system than the usual button mashing stuff. Right. And very fun, very, very fun. So if you like a like more technical kind of dueling, I guess it's a little more technical as far as, you know, you're not just mashing buttons. Like I said, you got to be much more fucking with it, you know. It's a very good time. And for me, after the challenge of Elden Ring and getting good at that, this has been a nice sort of other thing to go attach myself to that has a stupid level of intricacy as far as those controls go.
On a scale from, in terms of like control input complexity, on a scale from Diablo to QWOP, where would you say?
Where Diablo is the high end?
Diablo is the easy end. Because
The low end?
You just click. It's a clicker. We've established this years ago, and I think everybody's finally realizing I'm Diablo Immortal. So
yeah, it's an idle game.
Yeah, it's an idle clicker. So on the other end, you've got QWOP, where you have to articulate
The hardest game ever made.
every body part to run a race.
So if QWOP is a 10, Elden Ring is like a 7, right?
Probably. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I would say from a control standpoint, it's relatively straightforward. They do have little like kind of combos for each hero you play. So you would have to kind of, you know, but they have a big sheet. You just like look at it, pull up the
like Street Fighter.
It's like Street Fighter-esque. But there's not that many of them. There's like 6 to 10 of them per. I would just say that the combat system is unique enough that, I mean, they throw you into a tutorial series to start the whole thing. It's really well done. So you definitely have to learn it. It's not a thing you have seen ever. But once it's there, it's actually, they didn't do anything dumb as far as like where they should have put buttons and stuff like that. So probably because it's complicated enough that they really had to fucking think about it to make sure it would work. So I would say,
so if you're into medieval Street Fighter castle sieging, they nailed it.
And you can play with buddies. It's 4v4 online matches, and running up and like throwing down with someone else and dueling someone else in the middle of a castle siege is pretty fucking cool, I gotta say. So they nailed it.
I think I was thinking of Dishonored or Dishonored, whatever.
Yes, Dishonored. I think it's
and that's
Dishonored.
why I thought Dishonored.
Dishonored.
Which I thought is what we were talking about, so I was confused because I was like, oh, that was kind of medieval like it's got a vibe of that, but I thought that was like putting demons in people and stuff, which is pretty different.
It was definitely more on the putting demons in people's side than this one. So if you like that, more like a Dishonored. That's your choice.
Dishonored. Yeah.
And demons are definitely more of a like a medieval thing, because like once people had guns, then demons weren't that big of a deal and they went extinct. Yeah. They're kind of like those large birds that people killed and ate, right? Yeah. Or just any large animal.
It's sort of like it turns out the demon's true weakness was being shot, you know?
Shot with guns. So if you have to stab one, that's a bigger challenge. Kind of like if you have a stick and there's a moose around, you're in trouble. You know? Same concept. Demons kind of died out in the medieval times.
The thing about meese, though, which is the plural of moose, is it almost doesn't matter what you have around in terms of defending yourself.
If you have a car, you're still done. You're
still dead. Yeah.
Yeah, you ever see videos of moose just walking down like the median, and they're just like they're the size of like 3 cars stacked on top of each other?
Too big. One of the few megafauna. It's huge.
Yeah, amazing. You love to see it.
Amazing.
All right, let's talk about the Murderbot Diaries. So this is a book series. Now, before we talk about it, I want to share my opening experience with it.
Hit it.
So it was recommended to me on Kindle a while, like 6 months ago or something. And I was looking for some sci-fi stuff, and I was like, well, it seems kind of like kind of edgy because it's called the Murderbot Diaries. And so I started reading it, and the opening scene is like an action scene, you know, from like a movie where like there's like wild shit happening and like an alien worm coming out of the ground, and like there's this murder bot thing. This thing. And so I got a couple pages in, and I was like, no, this seems kind of like brainless. And so I just stopped reading it like at that point. And if I had gone like one more page, then all of a sudden like everything changes, and it becomes this very like wholesome, like very subverting of every expectation you had kind of a series. And man, I wish I had just given it a chance at that time because it's so good.
It's so good. Yeah, I had found it from I think Jen had recommended it, and our producer and narrative designer, and a while ago. So I heard about it sort of in the brain pan, probably saw it on a Kindle thing too, but it's in Mills and Books. And then similarly, traveling, picked it up, and I read all of it. 6 books.
It's 6. I think it's 5 novellas and 1 novel or something like that. So it's quick reads.
Probably like
Can we start calling novellas booklings?
Booklings.
It's a bunch of booklings.
Because it's not a booklet.
Booklings.
Yeah. A booklet is like just a couple of pages.
Yeah,
like a bookling is like, it's like a baby book. So it's 6 booklings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a lot, but not a lot. And you don't ever want it to end once it starts. So my recommendation, if you're going to read it, be careful. Because I think if you make it through the first, apparently, like, 10 pages, the one that says to not turn the page on, you're going to be there for a while. Luckily, they're on the Kindle Unlimited thing. So like 5 of them are free. And then there's just 1 book in the middle that's cost money, I think, or something like that.
That's how they get you. You know, the whole thing's it's a trap. It's a bait and switch.
Yeah, I kind of feel like I got them, though, if with just sort of ratio.
Easily.
Seems a little off, being honest.
Yeah, that was a lot of free, really great storytelling.
Yeah. 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I don't have Kindle Unlimited, so I think Jenna just bought all of them, and we just have a family library. So I had read them. So like she had bought them, and then I just consumed all of them, and then I ran out, so I had to go buy the next ones, you know, because like I caught up. But yeah, it's one of my favorite, certainly series, but even just like books, you know, it's just so fun, so wholesome, you know. And there's a thing that it does that is, I think, pretty rare, because I think it's hard to pull off and like stay on the line, which is that having, you know, drama and danger and like uncertainty and things unfold. So there's something to be excited about and like worry about a little bit, but without you feeling like that worried, you know. So like you're never like you're never in a state of like anxiety, you know, because you feel pretty confident like things are gonna largely come out okay.
Things are gonna work out,
you know, and it manages to kind of like do that all the way through, where you don't get bored, but also you're not having there's no point where you're like, fuck, you know, like a thing that happened that you just really are bummed about now, you know. It does such a good job of that it's like, it's for the name of it and for what it is, it's a bizarrely wholesome reading experience.
Yeah, and my impression of it as well was that in a lot of cases you'll be watching a show, reading a story, and there's a lot of manufactured conflict and drama where it doesn't really feel like it makes sense, and the characters are kind of like being unreasonably non-communicative or unreasonably belligerent in ways that defy their normal mode of operating just to make some like new plot point happen, you know? That's the thing that bothers me the most about any storytelling. As soon as people just start doing stuff so that something can happen next, I'm out. But I never got that in this book. In this book series. Good books. The Murderbot Diaries.
Yeah, highly recommend.
What's the author?
Martha Wells, maybe.
Oh yeah, Martha G. Wells.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yeah,
that sounds.
But
right.
Yeah, I think so. All right. Now, we just want to get into some questions today because we didn't get into any last week. So these questions come from our listeners over at podcast.bscotch.net. The highest upvoted question comes from Fraser, who says, on an implementation level, what does the gamechanger pipeline look like? Does it generate or modify source code files for the game? Or is the game just a massive interpreter for the spec generated by the gamechanger? Okay, so I'm going to try to.
I'll leave that to you nerds to explain.
Try to think of how to explain this in a way that is
Give me a metaphor.
interesting, and that non-programmers will be like, oh, that's cool, right?
Yeah, the quick answer before Seth gets into the details is the latter in terms of how the question was set up.
Yeah. So up until now, the way that we've always made our games was that they were basically just a big pile of code. So if we wanted to have something interesting in the game, like in Level Head, we have maybe like a spike ball, right? Then everything about that spike ball, I would program in the code. Mm-hmm. So if we ever wanted to make a change to the spike ball, then you would have to know where in the code to find that, like all those pieces of information about it. And you would have to know how and what to change to make that change to that spike ball. Okay. And then beyond that, if I wanted to make that change available to everybody else, then I have to compile the game into a new version, like a new whole patch, and send that out. Right. So in other words, like all of the pieces of information that describe what's supposed to happen in the game and how the game works is just woven into the code. Mm-hmm. Okay. So the sort of revelation we had with the Game Changer was the idea that if we could separate that out, if we could separate out the description of what things are and what they're supposed to do into its own place, right? And the code of the game just reads that information and then turns it into gameplay, right? Then we would be able to make changes to the game so somebody could make changes to the game without ever opening code because the description of what the game is and how it works is somewhere else. So
can I try a metaphor here? I'm going to try one.
Yeah, try one.
This works. Let's say that you, this is a baking metaphor. We're going to go to the cake land for this. It was as if before the only person in the whole bakery who could actually bake anything was Seth. Mm-hmm. But the way he baked stuff was basically sort of, instead of having, all the different vats of whatever, your flour, your whatever else, nicely separated, and then having all the various implements and tools for dealing with combinations of them, as if he spent a very long time engineering like a peach cobbler machine that like you just sort of, all it does is make exactly this kind of peach cobbler. Okay.
It harvests its own wheat. It grows its own peaches.
Just the whole thing. So if
Sam says, hey, can we get this thing to also make like a strawberry pie too?
Then you're like, fuck, now I have to have it plant strawberries and figure out how to harvest the strawberries. And,
yep.
Yeah. So Sam couldn't come in there and just like turn a knob and like flip a dial from peaches over to strawberries or whatever.
And I couldn't even come in and be like, just need a little bit of sweetness. Just like a little more sweetness in this. Can I put some more sugar in here? It's just be like, I have to do this now. This is on me.
Yeah. There's no sweetness knob. The sweetness is something that comes from, how 6 other machines are interacting and trying to automatically figure out how much sugar goes into this cobbler,
So then now it's as if, it works like regular baking where you have a recipe and then a variety of tools and things to then sort of, you read the recipe, you're like, oh, let's try a little bit of this, a little bit of that, whatever. And you can measure things out. You can set all those dials. And then you basically, mix them together and basically you're just following a recipe that's been established and you can feel free to tweak here and there as you go.
Yeah. I guess. And then the game knows about kinds of recipes, right? So as in like the machines that now make the stuff. So now what you're not doing the baking, right? You're writing the recipes and you're feeding the recipe into a machine that does the baking for you. And
so it's kind of like the game now knows like what's a cup, what's a teaspoon, what's eggs, what's flour,
what's sugar.
It knows it knows what all those things are,
and then it knows about kinds of things like what's a cookie, and now within some bounds it understands the idea of a cookie, and so it can make maybe 100 different kinds of cookies that you would describe all of them as cookies when they come out the other side, and so now the people who are trying to come up with new cookies don't have to bake the cookies. They don't have to go make the machine. They basically just try a new recipe and feed it into the machine.
The place where this becomes magical territory is where you take the recipe your magic recipe scroll. And while eating the cookie that you're making, you're like, this should be a little sweeter. You change the recipe, and then you take another bite, and it's fucking sweeter. Or you're like, this should have some strawberries in it. And you're like, and you take a bite, there's some strawbs in it, you know? That's that's basically what's happening. Mm-hmm. How's that?
Yeah, and it's kind of hard to describe in realistic terms because it seems unrealistic. Like,
it's magical. It's true.
Because the game changer is a piece of software that is in the game, right? Because like we said, the game is an interpreter for the big old pile of information, just like a big blob of data that the game changer produces. And so all you have to do is so the game changer is an interface that exists in the game. You can go in there, like Sam was saying, you're eating your cookie. And in this case, you could actually be eating a cookie in the game, right? And you're like, I don't like how this works. I don't like what this is doing. Or maybe you look at a creature in the world and you're like, no, that should be moving faster, right? You just pop over to the game changer, which is just one menu away. You open up the creatures section, find that creature, take its little movement speed slider and just turn it up a little bit. When you go back in the game and boom, it's moving faster now. So I've been personally surprised a bunch of times because now, Sam is able to go add stuff to the game and change things without my involvement at all, just period. And there have been so many times, where I have booted up the game and suddenly there's like a weird new item that I find, or just maybe I hit a developer thing. It's give me all the weapons in the game, right? And suddenly I have this weird weapon that I've never seen before and I have no idea what it does. And Sam has made it do stuff, set up its interactions with the world, given it an animation, all of this stuff. And I didn't even know about it. Yeah. Right? So that's, we still have a lot of work to do to make it even more scalable so that we can bring more members of the team into it. Because there is a danger of if anybody can wander into your bakery and just start twisting knobs on all your different recipes, right? Then
and if customers can buy those cookies without somebody stepping in and being like, let me taste test this first.
Let me make sure this cookie's good, right? So it is possible to make it so easy to change things that you lose visibility on stuff. Yeah. And so that's something to be careful of, or to make it so fast and loose that lots of people can change things that maybe they shouldn't be changing without talking to other people first.
Well, that was the motivation.
So that's kind of the next challenge
for having it be so tightly controlled on the data validation side. And that's where this differs from something like, say, the web, because the web is also the same idea where you make a web page, which is HTML, right? And then the browser interprets it and then it draws it for you, right?
Yeah.
And then just like what we're doing, then you can also introduce code through JavaScript to now do magic things and manipulate stuff and do whatever, right? But this layer that we're dealing with is it's kind of that same idea, this data layer, but you have to predefine very strict constraints so that the range of allowed shapes of the data and what the value types can be and that kind of stuff is extremely specific and is designed with implementation, basically with interpretation in mind, so that you already know how you're going to convert this information and what the range of information that's allowed is and how you're going to enable a wide array of variants of something to be made. So that now as somebody does and with control though, so that now when Sam is off making stuff, the kinds of things he can do that make for a weird experience on the other side are really restricted to mostly designed things, as in if he does just something that just is weird, right? Then just a weird design idea, right? That's the kind of stuff that can slip through. But if he tweaks a variable in such a way, he can't tweak a variable in such a way that the game just breaks. Right?
I would say it allows us to, so it allows us to do something. Everybody gets kind of the input-output of sugar, right? That's a pretty obvious, you don't have to think a lot about how that works. But if I said, I want these cookies to be fluffier, I want a fluffiness index, then what Seth would do is go back to how this machine works, how the cookie changer works, and add a fluffiness index dial that itself, there's a bunch of other stuff going on under the hood where he's talked to some bakery chemists, whatever else, to figure out how does this actually work? How do we make it more fluffy? What's the limit?
Baking soda's in there, whatever. Yeah,
exactly. How does this cascade? Whatever. And then the output, though, is just there's now a dial for fluffiness. So I can be like, I want some more fluffiness. But we have the large work then is to figure out what something like fluffiness means and how it cascades, and then create good bookends of minimum maximum values and make it so that no matter how intensely I turn it up or down, that I don't make either like a dumb cookie that no one wants.
He doesn't make it. Yeah, you don't make a cookie that's just sugar, right?
Yeah, or
like
just baking
it's
soda
impossible.
or whatever.
Or, yeah, right.
Yeah. And this is cool because that also means once you figure out, for example, how to represent fluffiness of a cookie, and how to make your machine understand what fluffiness is, right? Then you've covered both ends of the problem, right? One is describing it so that people can turn the knob, and the other is interpreting what different positions on that knob mean, right? Once you've got both ends of that, you can now start applying your fluffiness formula to other things, right? Because then Sam can be like, oh yeah, I really like having this fluffiness dial on cookies, but yeah, I want a fluffier cake now, right?
Yeah.
And I could just go, yeah, no problem. I'll just take the formula I made over here and just put it on the cake maker, right?
And
on the cake
tweak
interpreter.
it a bit. Yeah, maybe tweak it a bit. So
Yeah, it might require a little bit of fiddling, or maybe I could just plug it right in. Yeah. But I can just take that same dial and just put it over on the cake thing, right? And so this really interesting thing is starting to happen as we've been really using the game changer to add and edit stuff in the game, is that new ideas that we have about stuff we want to see in the game, they now go through a different process, which is Sam will first look at all the different knobs and dials and structures that exist and be like, here's this vision I have for this new thing that's supposed to be in the game. Do I have the knobs and dials necessary to make that happen, right? And sometimes he just does. And other times there's something missing.
It's sort of like if
there's a
said,
checkbox missing. Right?
Yeah, we've never made crepes with this tool before. Well, we've made cookies, we've made cakes, we made pies. Can I make a crepe with the dials we got? And the answer could be
and so we might go like, well, like I've got a flatness slider for cakes, and let's try
in there, with the cake.
Yeah, let's try turning that way down and see if that is crepe-like enough.
Does it meet the crepe vision? Is that what it is?
And if we go, actually, no, this is still just a cake that's kind of dumb and flat now, right? we may need a whole new kind of thing called a crepe, and so. Or we may find a couple of extra dials that we can add to the cake formula that allow you to create a crepe, but also those dials are now exposed to other types of cake too, and so now you can start to mix and match all these components and sliders and just create completely new things that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to conceive of.
So you're essentially like, oh shit, because we figured out how to make crepes, I can now make scones, which is not a real thing in the real world, but it definitely is in the game changer side of things, right? You add capability over here and you get that capability over there also.
Yeah. And this has also been kind of breaking my brain because the way that I used to have to work in the game is if we wanted to have a lot of content. So like in the original Crashlands, I think we had like 990 something uniquely defined items in the game at launch. So an item would be like a creature, a tree, a pebble,
some grass,
just anything that kind of is represented in the game world. But those things had to be very concretely defined in terms of categories. And a lot of what they did in the game world and what they were capable of doing had to be kind of inferred based on their category. So we have like a thing that's like called a component, and components do a very specific thing and they're represented a very specific way in the world. And if at any point Sam said, hey, I want a thing that, does all the things a component does, but this one aspect of it differently, right? Then that's a big problem because there is no knob, there is no dial. And the reason that it's working the way it is because there's a bunch of code that's kind of like piecing all these other things together to try to make it work. And so it becomes very difficult to make exceptional things, as in like things that break the rules, right? But with the game changer, since everything is just made up of all these like mixed and matched knobs and sliders and stuff. I've been just systematically removing my code that like only existed to infer how things were supposed to behave, because all those things are now just checkboxes and sliders and stuff, and I can just be like, what is that slider? And just read it and just do it, right? So the code has actually gotten much smaller and cleaner over time, and our designs have gotten way weirder.
Yeah,
I would say.
They're more specific in the way that we always. Because the general rule of thumb, unfortunately, if you're making a video game, is that you need sort of like a novelty. You need to have more or less some level of constant novelty happening, and you can do that in a couple of different ways. But a lot of it is done through unique content. Like what's novel? It's just something that's unique, right? So the first time you see one enemy, well, the second time you're like, oh, okay, and then after that you're like, oh, gives a shit. I know everything about this, whatever. So the problem is that you basically need to set up a general soup out of which you can create a lot of very unique little moments for people.
Deviations from the norm.
Yeah, that's what provides a lot of that just kind of constant engagement, and especially a lot of that sudden rearranging of how you see a game world after something is revealed to you or whatever else. And we couldn't do that at scale before in any sort of way. You can do it for short games for sure, but it's very expensive. Novelty is extremely expensive unless you have a tool like this.
Yeah, and I think like an easy way to think about it is if you had like rocks in your game and a mining pick in like the typical survival game style, right? Then you would just think of like, okay, there's like different levels of rock, and then there's different levels of mining pick, right? And the mining pick just does more damage, and the rocks just have more HP. A rock is a rock, a pick is a pick, nothing to see here, right? Yep. But once you can control all these different aspects of a thing, then you can have unique and interesting properties on every rock and every pick, and you no longer have to think about them just as a linear progression of power. It's not just like you just change their level and suddenly, and that's the one thing that's different. Now you can have a rock that like explodes unless you like get it wet first, or, whatever it is. Like we were just talking today about like, what if when you broke this one rock, it like exploded into debris of like boulders that you had to make sure you didn't get hit by. It's like easy. You could totally do that, right? And that's a unique thing about that rock that no other rock has, and that creates a really cool and interesting gameplay experience other than just like it's a level 2 rock, right?
Yeah, how is this rock fun in its own little contained way, even if it is a level 2 rock, right? Because basically the next point you get to with this is then what this allows you to do is really make a design that is kind of all over the place. And so then you have to actually, you have to be more keen on what the design, what's the point? Where are you trying to go with this? Like, what is the design for? And make sure that everything you put in is doing that job, right? But that's a much more enjoyable position to be in than to be like, I would like for this rock to explode, and for someone to be like, no, it can never explode because otherwise there is
rocks are rocks. They sit there and take damage from picks. That's what a rock does, right? Yeah, you don't have to accept anything, but yeah, it's you can do anything, but should you do anything? Yeah. That now all the big challenges are just design challenges, which is where we wanted them to be in the first place. So that's good. Next question comes from Mimmabip Gourkee, who says, how much direction do you give your freelancers for creating music and sound effects? Are you spending a lot of time testing out music and sound effects found online to find out what you like first? Or do you let them have free reign to do what they think is best? Pretty much the latter for a lot of things when it comes to like.
Yeah, I think it basically depends. The problem is there's a scope question here that's hidden, I think, which is like depending on the scope of the project, right? So,
and also the kind of thing, because you think like the theme song, like the opening theme song for the game versus like monster number 10's like I'm being struck noises, right?
So typically what I'll try to do just as far as like providing useful direction is either basically a written description of what the thing is, the mood associated with it, or at best, some of these references and stuff like that, where it's like, oh, it'd be awesome if it, felt like this kind of a laser blast that I saw in this scene from this movie. Here's a clip on YouTube, whatever. Right? So you can get very specific, or you could be like, I don't know, a country vibe, and then that's what they got to work with. But you do want to always give them something, unless you're in that sort of, the first formative stage where you also don't know, but you probably should know a little bit. So they shouldn't be like, because free reign's not good for working with as a creative person either. You actually need a constraint to find, some direction. So
yeah, and there's a lot of kind of like good enough principle at play as well, where like we don't want to have to go back and forth with them 20 times to like adjust the sound of like a leaf rustling, because who cares? So there's a lot of things, like Sam was saying, it's all about leverage and about the kind of like experiential sort of weight of the thing, where if it's meant to be a big salient emotional point, or if it's something that happens a lot.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like one of the things that we wanted to make sure to iterate on quite a bit this round was stuff like the sound of a footstep as the player walks around, because you hear, you're gonna hear that footstep sound like a billion times. And if there are points where it just doesn't really match with like the kind of thing that you're walking on or whatever, then that can break the immersion. And if a person picks up on that, then they'll just keep hearing it every time their foot hits the ground as like this weird kind of like out of place thing. So those things, we'll kind of go back and forth and give some extra feedback rounds on. But one of the things I like about how Fat Bard does their sound work, though, that's our contractor, Fat Bard, is they do a lot of self-directed stuff as well, where they will, play the game, and then they will come to us and say, hey, here's a bunch of stuff that we noticed, or that we either like we want to update the sounds for, or here's some missing sounds, right? Here's our ideas for those things. Let us know what you think, right? And then we can go through that. And then so they do a lot of that, like kind of a push system where they can go through and figure out what they think the game needs and tell us, and we can give feedback on that.
Yeah,
too,
that's actually
which
the
is
best kind
great.
of model to have with a contractor, is the one where you're hiring somebody for their expertise, right? And so you're saying like, I don't know, I don't have time because I'm doing other things, and I also am not a deep expert, right? And hopefully somebody knows enough to be able to give feedback, right? But then it's this combo of being able to provide some kind of very loose direction, but still have that something that the person can work with, and using feedback as the mechanism to get to a final point that everybody's happy with. But then having that self-directed part where, again, because they're the expert, right? And they're the ones who pay. Because like when I'm playing a game, I'm immersed in the soundscape, but I'm not noticing all the details of the sound that's creating that immersion, right? And there's stuff that like if it wasn't there, I would be less immersed, but not even know why. There's like a lot of stuff like that. Like I wouldn't notice that I wasn't hearing footsteps, right? But I also won't notice when I am hearing footsteps if it makes sense. But when I'm not noticing the fact that they're actually there, I'm still feeling it, right? It's still putting me into the immersion. And so that's what a person who's like really good in the sound example is going to do, is they're going to say like, oh yeah, here's the stuff that you haven't paid attention to, right? So let's just do that also.
Yeah. How do you build an immersive soundscape that, lives in the background? Yeah, there was something kind of in this line of like things that you don't notice because if they're done well, but then once something gets off about them, you can't unsee it. Is you guys remember that game Wild Star from
I never
2014?
played it, but yeah.
So something always just felt like really weird in that game, where like I felt kind of like uneasy and disconnected from like my place in the world physically. Like it was sometimes hard for me to be able to understand where my character was and where other things were, and like how far away they were. And I finally figured it out after quite a while, was that if you zoomed your camera out past a certain point, then nothing had shadows. Right? The shadows they were gone. So there was not even like a little like blurry circle under the thing. And so suddenly I just couldn't quite tell where something was standing on the ground.
Yeah.
And man, that was weird. Like, and you don't realize, just how big of an impact just like a blurry kind of dark circle. And you don't notice it and whatever. But then as soon as it's gone, there's just like this feeling that something is wrong.
On the art side, you see this with animation. They refer to it as animation that you feel but you don't see, which is these anticipation frames, sometimes overshoot frames or else that are so short that, like, again, you as a regular person experiencing the piece of media don't see the frame, but you are feeling its effect, and you could tell that you could basically, if you were to stack up, a variety of those kinds of things on one animation that's the same versus one that has them stripped off, you would be able to tell that something was wrong, but you probably wouldn't even be able to see a difference.
Because you animate at like 20 FPS, right? Isn't that like the classic animation?
24.
So every frame, every distinct portion of an animation is a 20th of a second, or roughly, right?
Yeah.
Very fast.
And those in between frames, those like smears and stuff, right, where it's like the starting to the ending position, it's literally one frame. It's literally 1/20th of a second, right? Mm-hmm. And the absence of that, of just 1/20th of a second of an experience that your eyeballs had, right, can be the entire difference between something feeling good and feeling either visibly just bad, like you can tell, or just unsettling, like you're not exactly sure. But this also goes the other way too, right? Where somebody who really knows their stuff along whatever domain also knows what to not really worry about, right? And so you'll see this sometimes. And I was playing Back 4 Blood a few weeks ago with some friends, and it's all of a sudden they started looking at the walls and being like, these walls have like a lot lower texture, right? Like a lower resolution texture than like everything else, right? And I hadn't noticed. And then I went and looked, and I went and like, steered my character over and like looked at the wall really close, and I was like, oh yeah, it is like a lot lower resolution, right? But I hadn't noticed because it didn't matter, right? Because like they put
after like 60 hours of playing or something, it's still never noticed.
Right. And so they're trying to preserve resources by not have high textures when they can avoid it, so that the game size is smaller, there's less memory usage, et cetera, right? And
I wonder if it's also because they put those score marks on there when you shoot stuff. If there's some,
right, because they need to save those too. Because they keep those permanently, right? Like they try to, or at least they keep it for a long time, so it seems permanent.
I don't know how they would do that at all, but
because they're basically drawing stuff on, right? And they have to keep. So there's so much stuff they have to keep track of in like texture space. And so anywhere they can cut down on, like they're going to do it, right? And so if you have a big expansive wall that doesn't have anything on it you're supposed to care about, they can basically get away with throwing in a low res texture that you just don't pay attention, because it also makes your eyes slip off of it, right? But it's a dangerous game though, because if it's in contrast, if there's something in front of it that's really high resolution, right, then that can draw attention. Which is actually what had happened, is that there was something that was really high res, like sitting in front of this like low res wall. And so that it broke immersion for a couple people playing. But I didn't even notice it until like I was, told to focus on it basically. Yeah.
Well, and it's a game that keeps you moving, right? So like rarely are you just going to stop and be like, let me just look at this wall for a minute, because oftentimes the high res thing in front of the wall is a zombie that's trying to kill you. And you're not looking past the zombie being like, wait a minute.
Well, it's blurry anyway, right? Because you're moving your cursor constantly. So you're already not seeing those. And so you can just get away with a lot. And this is the kind of thing that like a really good, not just contractor, but just anybody who's an expert at their work is going to be bringing, is they could come in. That's what Seth said, is like the push system versus the pull system, right? Of them coming in and saying, hey, like,
here's what this needs.
Yeah, we can like if they have other information, like, oh, we've got some performance issues, and in their domain, they know how they can eke out some extra performance on behalf of other stuff by like knocking this thing down, right? Then you can get a lot of really cool stuff out of that.
Yeah. So, and if that's a role that you're in, if you're in that contractor role, do that, because it's appreciated. It's very much appreciated to just come in and be like, all right, I know what to do here. Here's my plan. Sound good? And then the person's like, yep, sure. Sounds good. I don't know. All right. Last question comes from RoninGameDev, who says, I have this constant urge to just make a better or different version of the game I am currently playing. Do you guys have this? And if so, how do you fight it and keep working on Crashlands 2? Now, because I always play a lot of 3D games.
Yeah, that helps.
Yeah. And we make 2D games.
Yeah. I think it's also with something that already exists, thinking about making that thing it's not worth it, because it would be so much work to like remake the thing to like where it is, and then like to then add the next thing, that I'll often think, oh, it would be nice if, and then some design change, right? But that is literally never followed up with, I want to do that, right?
Right.
It's actually, if there's any conscious thought at all, it's like, I'm glad that I don't have to worry about this. And it's actually fine though, because I don't want them to have to do it either. Because I know.
Thank God this isn't my game, and I can tweak those.
Well, I also think that there are times where I'll get really into a game and I love to play it, but I can appreciate just how much of a pain in the ass it would be to be on the business end of it.
Yeah.
So like Rocket League is a super fun game, right? But it's a physicsy, fast-paced PvP multiplayer game, right? And like the technical side of that alone is problematic, but then the community management and multiplayer side also I don't want to have anything to do with. Or like in Kerbal Space Program, the community colloquially refers to the Kraken, which is anytime the physics engine bugs out and your spaceship just fucking explodes. like sometimes you have a spacecraft that's just like complex enough that the game can't quite figure out how to register all of like the structural connections, and your ship just
or it's just the physics simulations.
Yeah,
because physics simulations are step based, just like animations. It's it's the same thing, right? And so if the step is too wide of a distance because you got a low frame rate or whatever, there's like complex stuff. It's like, so it's usually the more complicated the ship is, the more stuff that has to be calculated, then the more time has to get skipped in between each one to give you a constant frame rate, right?
It's almost
give you a
like
constant simulation time.
It was that bridge that like when the wind frequency hit that bridge that it like wobbled
starts
hard enough. It's sort of the same thing. And you see this with you occasionally see these very funny bug clips from 3D games where like a body gets stuck somewhere and it like just kind of starts vibrating and then like really starts going and then just fucking like shoots into the sky. It's at light speed.
Yeah, and it's because there was that conflict, right, where because clipping is when two things overlap that aren't supposed to, right? And that happens when a thing is checking where it's going next to see if there's something there, right? But it looks a little too far, basically, right? Because it's going to skip some space because of how slow or basically how much has to happen in between time steps, right? And so it doesn't actually realize that it has gone through something, and then it goes through the thing, and then suddenly everywhere it looks, it's inside it's hitting something.
Right? And it's like, I gotta get the fuck out of here.
So it
Increase the
starts
distance at some point. Yeah.
It's like a physics panic, right? Where it's then trying to like do something to escape. And this is also why like the resolution of those things is either they just vibrate forever or they vibrate for a while and then suddenly shoot out at like an enormous speed. Right?
Yeah.
They're very funny though.
Yeah, it's like in my mind, like I like anytime I've spent sufficient time with a game that I really enjoy, you will come across weird stuff. And I always think like, I don't think that I necessarily could do this better because I know how intractable some of these problems are, right? Like I want to go like run into my own problems that I've wandered into unknowingly and not like not go face first into a known problem that somebody else who is very smart couldn't solve, you know?
I think largely when I play games, as I get into them, it's more so that I love when they do something that they execute an idea that like everybody has, whether it's about how leveling up works or, whatever, but just with like a little bit of, there's just a different angle on it. It doesn't even have to be completely weird. It's just like, just a little bit of a different angle. And you just sort of store those then in your bag of sort of mental tricks for stuff if you run into it in your own game. So I like using them as just sort of like grab bags of tools essentially. And then the thing is like most games, you can't actually just take a thing and put it in your game because they're so context based. Yeah. So that's one of those traps I think people fall into, which is also the idea of like every game you play pulling like most things from it, whatever your most recent. It's not like after playing For Honor, I'm like, ooh, we should have a blocking based positional, combat system for your limb. No, but I like how they did other things that we could pull off, or take like little tidbits.
But you also still might take some piece of that, right? Some idea of like how the combat system works and like the idea of how they did the timing or how complex it is, or even just something like how they set up the controls, like given how complicated of a thing they're trying to do. What was the design approach they took towards mapping that onto a controller and then trying to use that, like trying to learn something general, right? That's a little specific because it's still about that detail, but you take the generalizable lesson and try to figure out how you can apply that, which is where all the fun is.
100%.
Yeah. So, I've never thought like I want to just make this game, but there's always inspiration that you can find just all over the place. So, that's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producers Fat Bard and Jen Coster for putting the podcast together, and thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the archives. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.